Hey there and welcome back. If you didn't know already, we actually publish a newsletter once in a while that is meant to keep you up to date with everything going on in the Payload ecosystem and just giving you the most important new features or developments regarding Payload. Now, one thing we want to try out is actually turning this newsletter into a video as well to just give you more context and opinions on a few topics and just to elaborate a little bit more. Because if we put too much information in a newsletter, nobody's going to read it. So this is the video version of the Payload Newsletter 6 that was just sent out. And let's just dive straight into it. The first thing we are covering and that is new is query presets. Now, up until this point, you could only really hard code certain presets with the attribute called baselist filter, which could be used, for example, for things like a soft delete. Now, however, in a new version, Payload allows admin editors and admin users to create certain presets. So let's say you want to filter all users for a specific attribute. You use the filter attribute. And now what you can do is actually save this as a preset that can be either private or also shared with all other users or specific user groups in the admin panel. Now, we've created an in-depth video about this, which I'm going to link somewhere. So I'm not going too much into detail about it, but still, I just wanted to walk you through it really quick. I've created a very simple boilerplate project with the newest Payload version. And let's say we want to enable query presets for our users collection. It's actually not activated by default. You have to turn it on actively. So all you have to do for this is go to the users collection. And in the collection config, we have to type enable query presets and set this to true. Now, if we go into our development server, into our users collection, and let's just set a filter. Or also columns. The cool part about query presets is you can store filters and you can store divisible columns in that. So let's just kick out updated at and created at and just show the email and the ID. And we also want to filter for, let's say the email, which doesn't really make any sense. The email contains def. Now it should only show us, one of the users. If you want to save this preset, we can click on those three dots, and under presets, we can click on create new. We can give it users with test. We can select if it's private or shared. If it's shared, we have a lot of options to share this preset and who we want to share it with. Like I said, we have an in-depth video about this. And here we can see the filters that are applied. So our filters, users, where email contains def, and it also shows the columns that we have activated here. Now let's just save it. And if we just reload this thing, we can select a preset. Now this has been activated anyways because the user settings are saved. But let's just go back and show all columns. Now we can select a preset, select this one, and voila, now we only see the email column and the ID column. And we also have our filters applied. Now this is super practical for a lot of use cases. For example, what we could do in media, we could create certain filters that only show either videos or images or videos that are over 10 megabytes or something, and actually save those presets to reuse them. Next up, there are a lot of performance improvements if you're using MongoDB specifically for join fields. Now, a lot of technical things have happened, but the TLDR is that join fields are now finally performant on MongoDB, and not just for small data sets and simple documents, but actually for large collections and documents that have a lot of fields. Now, if you just have a very small project that doesn't store a lot of data, you won't really notice a huge impact. But, and unfortunately we had this experience, if you have documents that have a few more fields, like 10, 20, or 30 fields with, let's say, 2 or 3 join fields, the performance was really bad. we only had a few thousand documents stored in a collection. And if you would just run a normal query against indexed fields, it will still load for around 10 seconds. So this is now all gone in version 3.26.0. So if you don't want to upgrade to the latest version, which I would obviously recommend you to do, you should make sure to at least upgrade to this version to fix those performance issues. Talking about performance, Payload has also made it easy to even further optimize compilation speed and therefore the performance of your development server. What you can do now is you can opt out of bundling server-only dependencies in your development mode. And that can actually significantly improve the compile time, so the time it takes to compile all the packages before you can see anything in the development mode. And obviously also recompile times, which means every time you change something in a code, it has to recompile everything before you see the changes. Now, in some cases, it can even cut them in half. Obviously, it always depends on the exact structure of your project. Now, if you create a fresh project, for example, using npx create payload app, and you use the latest version, the flag is automatically activated. But if you're upgrading from an older version, you will have to add it manually. We're back in our code base. All you have to do is go to the next config MJS file. And here you can see this is where we adjust the next config. And in the export, it exports it with a function called with payload, where you just pass it the next config. And here you have the options. And this is the option that we want to set if that isn't activated yet. We set def bundle server packages to false, which will exclude those server only packages. Now, the second thing, and you might have already known this, the second thing you can do to optimize performance in dev mode is actually enable turbo in development mode. Now, right now, this is a flag. You can set turbo, and this will switch out Webpack as the bundler for turbo in the development mode, which is also significantly faster. Just as a side note again, both the server bundle flag and the turbo flag might cause issues in your project depending on your exact configuration. Now, this is why you can always opt out of them. Even if turbo is now considered stable with the newest Next.js version, there might still be some issues regarding your dependencies. So just test it out, see if it works, see if it improves performance. One important thing, if you switch from Webpack to Turbo, for example, it's a good idea to just clear the Next.js folder just to make sure that there's no caching, and obviously restart the development server to make sure you actually see the benefits. Moving on, there is a very exciting new official plugin on the way, and that is the plugin for import and export. Now, it's currently still work in progress, and as of right now, only exports are available, so you can't import, you can just export. But it is planned to support import and exports from and to, most importantly, CSV files and JSON files, but there might also be added, future support for Excel files, PDF files. Let's see where that goes. So I'm just going to walk you through it really quick. I have already added the plugin in my payload configuration. Now it is a separate package that you have to install. So all you have to do is pnpm add or pnpm install, add Payload CMS, plugin, import, export. After that, you have to go into your payload config and add the configuration here. Now it is very simple to set up. You have to specify the collections that you want to apply it for. So again, you have to opt in certain collections for the export. You can either disable the job queue or not. By default, it is async. But if you don't have large data sets, you can just force it to be synchronous. And therefore, you just have to set this flag to true. Apart from this, you can actually overwrite the export collection. So the way the plugin works is it automatically creates an export collection where it stores all of the exported files in a bucket if you want, or on the local storage. This is just an option to overwrite the static directory where it saves them. And you can then see them as a backlog. So if you export, your users 5 times over the course of the last 7 days, you will see a nice backlog there. So let's check it out in our development environment. I have already enabled the plugin for the users collection. Now, if we just click on those 3 dots again, we can see export users. And here that will open up our export page where you can choose a file name. So we can say users export April, for example. We can choose the format of CSV or JSON. We can select a limit. So we want to export a maximum of 100 users. We can also sort it by certain criteria. So for example, by the email. And then, and this is very powerful, we can choose to export all documents, to use the current filters, or to use the current selection. So if I go back here and just select one of them, and I click on export and choose use current selection, it will only export the current selection. Same thing for the filters. So if we were to use query presets like this one, and again go to export, we can set it to use the current filters, and that will only export what is in our current filters. Apart from that, we can also choose the columns to export. So we can select email and ID. We could also export login attempts. So it actually allows you to also export collections that would otherwise be hidden in Payload. And if we click on save, it will create a document in our exports here. And you can view the file, you can download it again, you have a nice backlog. So I'm very curious to see how the import will work, but I'm really looking forward to it because this again will improve the user experience in Payload massively. And I feel like it's a kind of general movement towards adding certain convenience features that Payload was lacking compared to other competitors like Strapi or Contentful. Now, last but not least, large file uploads on Vercel. This is a feature that people have pretty much been waiting for since Payload version 3 beta came out, and you could actually deploy your Payload application on Vercel. Now, for those of you who don't know, the big problem with serverless applications like Vercel or Netlify is that they limit file uploads to a certain size, which in this case is around 5 megabytes or 4.5 megabytes. And this can really be an issue because content editors are not able to upload, let's say, larger videos or images that might be, larger than the limit. So Payload now has a workaround, and that workaround works for all official storage plugins, which means S3, Vercel Blob Storage, Google Cloud Storage, Upload Thing, and also Azure Blob. And it leverages client-side uploads, and that is using so-called pre-signed URLs to directly upload files from the client to the actual bucket, for example, if you use S3. So it doesn't even touch the Payload server. What it only does is Payload requests a so-called pre-signed URL from the bucket that authenticates, and that can only be used once, that authenticates the client to upload a certain file to the bucket directly. Now, there's one important note. If you want to use client-side uploads, your S3 provider or storage provider in general has to support this upload through pre-signed URLs, and it also needs to support CORS requirements. CORS, so cross-origin resource sharing, is relevant here because we're not uploading from the server. So a usual upload would be client to server, and then the server uploads that file to the bucket. Instead, we're actually uploading from the client directly, and this is why we need CORS settings. So we need to whitelist our front-end URL. So let's say you're using localhost 3000 in your local development, or you're using website.com in your production environment. You need to whitelist this exact URL in your bucket so that it's actually allowed to upload files to it. Unfortunately, Hetzner, they just released S3 support, so you can now have S3 buckets on Hetzner. They don't support this yet. So in our case, in our example that I'm going to show you in a second, we're using DigitalOcean. Back in our code base, I have already added the S3 storage plugin. So I'm going to show you client-side uploads with the example of S3. This is a very default configuration for the media collection, which stores all media files in an S3 bucket with a prefix of media, which means it will show it to you as a folder inside the bucket, and that contains all media files. This is just the configuration for our bucket. And the only thing that we have to set if we want to change to client uploads, we need to set client uploads to true. Now, one just quick tip, if you create a project, you don't have client uploads set to true, and you switch it on later, you will have to regenerate the import map in Payload. Otherwise, you might get an empty screen or an error. So all you have to do for that is do pnpm payload generate import map. Now, before we can use this configuration in production, we have to add our course whitelisted origins in our bucket in order for this setup to work. Luckily, DigitalOcean makes this very easy to do, so you don't have to mess with any XML files or custom rules. All you have to do is you have to go to your DigitalOcean dashboard, and I've created a demo bucket here. It's already wired up to my project. I have created an access key. I have connected it to my S3 plugin. But now I need to add course configurations. So I click on add here. And what origin I will add is my deployed origin on Vercel. I have already deployed this project to Vercel. So I have to do all about payload newsletter 6.vercel.app. And the important method that I need to allow is put. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this issue only exists on DigitalOcean, but what you have to do is, otherwise it will not work, is you have to allow the header of content type, because Payload will send that with it, and if you don't allow that header, the course rules will not apply and you will still get a course error. So let's save the course configuration, go back to our deployed version of the project and see if we can upload a big file. I've opened up my project in the deployed Vercel version. So it's all about payload newsletter 6.vercel.app, and I've logged into my admin panel. Let's go to media and upload a new media document. I have already prepared a large upload, which is actually our YouTube video about introducing query presets into Payload. And this has 49 megabytes, so it's well above the 5 megabyte limit for Vercel. Let's drag it in, give it an alt text, and click on save. Now, this might take some time because it's a large file, but after some time, it should still upload everything successfully. So as you can see, the upload is now successful, and we can see it in our admin panel. There's still one important thing to consider. If we click on this video and we open it up, it will still go through the server and not directly from the bucket. So you can see it will take some time to load. And here, this doesn't access the bucket, it accesses the server, which might lead to some problems if you have really large files and you're still using serverless. It might also crash on delivery. Now, yeah, so it now started playing. What we can do to fix this, at least for public media documents, so let's say for your videos and images on your website, we can actually disable the payload access control, because that's why it's going through the server. It has to check if you actually have access to the file and then deliver it to you. But if we have public files anyways, we can, instead of going to the server, like with the client-side uploads, we can directly fetch the resources from the bucket. To do this, we have to change two options in our plugin config. So let's go back into our code base briefly. And in here, we have to set the disable payload access control flag to true. This will, as it says, disable the payload access control. And in addition to that, what we have to do is set the ACL, sorry, not the access key, ACL to public read. Now, this will change the access control on the bucket pretty much to be a public read. So it's still not a public write. You can only write with a pre-signed URL or through the server, but you can directly access files from the bucket. One important thing to mention, however, is that this has to be set before the file is uploaded. If you upload a file and set this afterwards, the file will not be publicly accessible. But if we configure it this way and upload new files, Payload will automatically return, instead of the server URL for the file, it will automatically return the direct bucket URL, which is also, and this is a nice side benefit, a lot faster. So this will be it for our first video version of the newsletter. If you want us to go into any of the covered topics in more detail, please let us know in the comments below. Also, if you do have any questions, we will try to answer them as best as possible. And apart from that, take care and see you in the next video.